I would like, if we feel ready to flow, I'm going to light our candle. And yes. The heart stretching, all of it. There's so much poetry in the human condition and the human experience. Ugh, we are like, we're the only known poets in the universe that I know of. There might be some more out there. Imagine God's a poet, but we certainly are. All right, our sacred flame is lit. I'm going to read. I'm going to start by reading an excerpt from a very tiny book. It's this tiny. It's probably even tinier in person than it seems on screen. This is a book. It's about 10 pages long, written by Adrienne Rich, who's one of my favorite poets. Highly recommend her work if you don't know her yet. She's super honest, super raw. There's lots of like blood stains on her work, in my opinion, and I love her for that. Okay, Roberto. Yeah, well, you'll get this juicy morsel from Adrienne at least. This book is called Women and Honor, Some Notes on Lying. But this excerpt I'm going to read is not, it feels universal and really, really relevant to where I'm taking us tonight. And it's so funny because I don't always write out an outline for my class, but this particular class, it felt important because the territory is so big. So I wrote my little map and all these notes that I want to share with you guys. And then I had the sense of like, oh yeah, I'm sure in the honor book by Adrienne Rich, there's something juicy to share. And I went back and I read this and I was like, well, this just beautifully and perfectly says like so many of the things that I wanted to bring forward. And I'll just preface by saying, as a writer for myself, as a poet, hi Kilo, I'm so happy you're here. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. We're just getting flowing, actually. We were sharing a little bit, so you're right on time. Every now and then I encounter a poet that's so great, and it's pretty often, honestly. There's a lot of incredible poets out there where I read their work or discover their work, and I think like, well, that's feels like so much of how I write, but so much better. Like why, like it's all the same themes. It's like the same kind of vibe. Like why should I bother? And I just want to say that I always come back to, however much I might compare myself to the writers that I really, really admire, nobody can write my story. That's my one sacred weapon. That's the jewel that no one else who has ever lived or will ever live will be able to offer as a writer, as a poet. And so today we're going to get into the heart of why this matters for us and what a beautiful and really infinite wellspring of creative, unique creative potential it is to be really connected with and honoring of the stories that we carry in ourselves. And we're going to talk about honesty and truth as a revolutionary act and, stoking the fire of this courage and this edge that we might find ourselves in with how honest we're willing to be, whether that's in a poem, in anything that we write, or in how we speak and how we carry ourselves in the world. And there's always room to grow. There's always those little vines and tendrils that are kind of gripping us and trying to keep us in the safe, known, familiar territory. And sometimes that's not the most honest territory. So we get to use poetry today to free ourselves in this way. And so I'm going to read this little section from her and let it sink in. Adrienne Rich, she writes, "The liar often suffers from amnesia. Amnesia is the silence of the unconscious. To lie habitually as a way of life is to lose contact with the unconscious. It's like taking sleeping pills, which confer sleep but blot out dreaming. The unconscious wants truth. It ceases to speak to those who want something else more than truth. In speaking of lies, we come inevitably to the subject of truth. There is nothing simple or easy about this idea. There is no the truth, a truth. Truth is not one thing, or even a system. It is an increasing complexity. The pattern of the carpet is the surface. When we look closely, or when we become the weavers, we learn of the tiny multiple threads unseen in the overall pattern, the knots on the underside of the carpet. This is why the effort to speak honestly is so important. Lies are usually attempts to make everything simpler for the liar than it really is or ought to be. In lying to others, we end up lying to ourselves. We deny the importance of an event or a person, and thus deprive ourselves of a part of our lives. Or we use one piece of the past or present to screen out another. Thus, we lose faith even with our own lives. The unconscious wants truth, as the body does. The complexity and fecundity of dreams come from the complexity and fecundity of the unconscious struggling to fulfill that desire. The complexity and fecundity of poetry come from the same struggle. Wow. Wow. That's the end of class. Goodbye. No, just kidding. Wow. Just so much wow. It's so true. And I want to share just, yeah, she's magic. She's no longer alive, but her work is magic. And I highly recommend diving into it as a lead by example experience of a writer who really sent it, really told the truth of her stories. And I will say, reflecting on this class, I can recall that my path into poetry, it was always in me. I'm sure all of you can relate to this. I think it's once we reclaim poetry or find our way back to poetry, we realize there was a point at which it was alive in us, even from when we were very, very young, and we just didn't fully understand it yet. Some of us kept the thread. Most of us find it, remember it, and come back to it again and again and again. And my original return to poetry after a long wandering away from my depths in so many ways was in 2014 when I was living in the deep dark night of my soul in Las Vegas. And I was so spiritually, I was betraying myself so much and living so many stories that I felt such shame about that I could barely stand to be with the truth of who I was becoming. And finally, I felt like I know I've told the story in different ways at different times, so forgive me if you've heard this already, but I finally got to a point of feeling like my soul was dying in the life that I was living. And I didn't know what to do and I didn't know where to go. And I started to write about it privately with shame. But I did start to write about it. And I enjoyed what I was writing. It started to sing with that sort of, that duende, that mysterious quality that, it was just journal entries, but it had there was a poetic quality to it that started to give me some life force back. And I remembered, when I was like 12 years old, I used to write poetry. And so I found a writers group in downtown Las Vegas in the back of a bookstore. And I went there by myself, and it was a motley crew of people from all different kinds of people, a small group. I felt nervous, I felt excited, and I felt like anonymous, you know. It was like, oh, I can be who I am here. I don't have to have the mask on, I don't have to perform. I can just listen to my soul. And I wrote my way out of that time. I actually decided to write the story of what I was most ashamed of. And I left Las Vegas and I moved into my sister's guest house for 6 months. And I read every book I could find on writing. And I did my best to, make up for lost time with the craft. And I penned down and captured that story of that time. And it's still in my filing cabinet right here. It's a memoir called A Shiny Room in Hell. And it's not a poem, but it further stoked this love affair with poetry, because there were segments of it and passages that read like poetry and felt like poetry to me. And I started getting more and more, falling more and more in love with making my reality beautiful, no matter what it was, even in its ugliness, even in its darkness. And there was something about becoming the narrator of that story that held so much shame and so much power over me and informed me so much about my brokenness, and mirrored to me something that felt ugly to me. But then when I wrote my way through it, it became beautiful, and it became a treasure, and it became something that I ultimately dared to dream of having the courage to share. And every now and then, currently, I still feel like, it's still alive. Like it might come back. I might have to actually share that in some way. And I hope that really comes to life, because there's a lot of richness in it. But it brings me to a second quote that I want to offer you guys tonight as a little bit of inspiration. I remember finding this quote as I was going through this process with writing my story and writing myself free. And I probably shared this in other spaces too, because it's one of my favorite of all time. And it is, the truth will set you free, but not until it is finished with you. Goosebumps. I was just like, damn, all right. Here we are. This is the truth that is working through me, and it's not finished with me. I'm not free of it yet. Like, how do I get free? So I will offer us a perspective to chew on. That is that the truth won't be finished with you until you honor it. So this is an aspect of coming back to what Adrienne Rich is pointing at, which is that our bodies and our unconscious crave to feel the resonance of truth. I crave to be free and to be integrated and welcomed back home. And in order for the truth to be finished with us, sometimes we have to do our part. Like we kind of wait it out, and we want to outlive it, and we want to outrun it, and we want to write a new story that, paints over the past. But some of those stories need honoring. It's almost like a proper burial. What we're haunted in a way. A frame we could look at is that, are we haunted by what we don't properly honor? Are we haunted by what we don't properly give its rites of passage, of transformation? And so before I continue, I just want to invite us all to touch into our hearts right now. And with that share, the truth will set you free, but not until it is finished with you. Is there anything that arises, and you don't have to share it, I want this to be the first honest moment, just you and you. And it doesn't have to be something that feels negative or challenging, but it might be. Just noticing what the unconscious is softly lifting up into the subconscious and softly lifting up into the conscious mind. Is there anything, any stories that you've lived, any experiences you've moved through that still feel like they haven't set you free yet?
It really struck me, this quote, because I have used that quote. It's from John, it's from the Gospel. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So it's one of the biblical Gospels, actually, that has this one. When I was listening to you, it's in 2014, I was a student. I was graduating 2 master degrees in 1 year. And I was writing my master thesis. I was a law student and a human rights student. I was working in those fields. And you know what my thesis name was? The first one was called The Right to Truth, a gentle civilizer of an unpredictable past. And yeah, and I wasn't writing poetry. I wasn't creative. I wasn't there yet. I was really like career oriented. I was writing my thesis to, to be successful, to do my thing. And yet at the same time, there was so much truth in it. Like I wrote 2 master theses in the same year. I submitted them in the same spring. I went them with both on A. I graduated with cum laude, both of those things. And I can't remember, the hardship of working on those theses. I remember that I was so inspired by my topic, and I had no clue that after some years my name will be Satya. But in those master theses, I used some poetry. I wasn't a poetess myself, but I was writing them in a very poetic way. And I started off with, like, for example, the first one, it was a poetry from Radovan Karadzic, who is a war criminal, who has committed crimes against humanity. And he was a poet as well. So I used his poem. And then in the beginning of one of the chapters, I used that quote that you just quoted. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And today you put this ending to that. And I'm like, fuck. Because I feel I'm there. I'm writing. I have written so many stories, and after that period as well, and writing myself free. And I have published books, like one of them is called Fuck You, Honey, which is about like a very narcissistic relationship. And what I realize, like what comes back to me is still that, like, even when I have done that, so that book, it's naked, it's honest, and still, if I'm like even more deeply honest, I'm still showing, I'm still showing something, like even the strength of coming out of it. And part of me knows that I wasn't fully there, really, which is also proved by the fact that I went straight into another, even more deeply codependent relationship right after having been kind of out as an expert with that book. and now I'm in the process of writing that is so chaotic, but I'm writing through my teenage period. Uh, and again, I mean, it's obviously not the first time that I look into it or even write about it or even talk about it. And still, it's like, no, but the whole truth is not spoken. And I'm writing now in a whole different way. It's a fucking mess. It's a chaos. I don't know where I'm going. And it's called spiral, like some more synchronicities. It's called the magician's swirl, a spiral. And I'm just moving through and things reveal themselves to me during the writing. I'm like, something comes again. So yeah, it touches me a lot. It touches me a lot. And there is for sure challenge for me in this moment to to also be patient and know that it will be ready when it will be ready. That like, because there is part of me is like, I want it to be ready, I want it to be done. and then also this, like knowing that it will be for publishing, but at the same time, when writing these kind of things, I need to forget about it. Because as much as I remember, then I write for something, for someone to understand, but I can't. Yeah, so.
Wow, beautiful and powerful. And I'm so glad you did share that original quote from the biblical scripture. Yeah, this is David Foster Wallace. I don't know if I actually said that. And so he was basically taking that scripture and adding this piece that helps us. My takeaway from it is it helps us turn towards the relationship with truth itself. You know, and it's so speaking to that in the patience piece, which is there's a duality to it, and like Adrienne Rich wrote about, an intense complexity to it. What is when we feel like, okay, I've been honest, I've written these stories, I've excavated this, and then there can be even deeper patterns, even deeper layers that we have to, we find ourselves, maybe we don't have to, but we find ourselves being invited or pulled back into them. And so much of what you shared is so relevant to this process because, when we're talking about this tonight, our topic is true stories, and that and poetry as true stories. But I want to set a framework here, just really expanding for tonight. We're not necessarily talking about the form of a poem, although that's where we'll end up with our shared practice. But when we're entering the realm of true story writing, it can have so many forms, and it feels, like your thesis papers ended up having a poetic quality that emerged before you even had found that piece of yourself. And for me, a lot of my poetry rises up out of my journaling practice. And so one of the really common practices that we know for telling our true stories is expressive writing. And expressive writing has, there's research that, confirms all of these benefits for us as like a holistic being. There's health benefits, and we actually find ourselves healing and getting more free through simply taking out, we can take out altogether the pressure of writing a good poem and start with the raw story and start with what comes through when I don't have the felt sense of an audience. And I'm going to get into that in a moment, but I'm really glad you jumped in and shared. And now we have all of our voices in our like melting pot of truth tonight, because it's just beautiful to feel the way everybody's experience in this moment is weaving. And for tonight, we're going to, really start to feel how does poetry show up in my life? Or maybe there's different ways that it could, but I don't necessarily explore them all. A poem is actually, it's a form of poetry. It's a craft. There's a world to it. There's a lot of optional rules. I personally believe that poetry is like, it's a space of absolute freedom, and it's a really, really useful craft and form of poetry to be able to tell truths that we struggle to tell in a way that is generative and not harmful and non-violent and cathartic. And there's also poetry as a multi-dimensional quality of expression. There's poetry in essay. There's poetry in things like, our thesis that we write for school, or things that we write for work, or for copy for our business, or, of course, novels, right? I actually gravitate, one of my favorite writers of all time is Vladimir Nabokov, and he's written some really spicy stuff, and it's fiction, but he has some nonfiction as well. But reading his books, which are not, they're not called poetry collections. He's not like, here's my poem, but it is some of the most lush poetry I've ever read. And there's a lot of freedom that that poetry as a form of multidimensional form of expression gives us, that kind of breaks the status quo about what's okay to share and what's the right way to share it. And it allows this alchemy to happen with our stories, where they become so rich and so beautiful. And so for another little prompt, y'all can just write this in the chat. I'm just going to kind of go through these little points so we can get to our juicy writing practice. But feeling into what is poetry to you? I talked about it a little bit, but I want to feel from you, or allow you guys a moment to feel into your relationship with poetry. And I'll share a little bit more. You're welcome to drip some perspectives into the chat or take some notes. Poetry is a conversation with the divine and something beyond myself speaking through me. Beautiful. I feel that. Poetry is a foreign language that I know deep down somewhere inside of me, but it feels like it needs permission to be remembered. Poetry is expressing an emotion with words, leaving deeper meanings with juxtapositioning, contrast. Beautiful. Yes. Excellent. This is excellent. Weaving deeper meaning. So I'll continue as you guys thread this. So tonight we're going to be working with poetry that is story poetry. So there's lots of forms. Oh, I want to read this from Satya too. Two sides. One is full freedom space of feeling it all deep in the human, dirty, and most pure ones. Yes. And then the transpersonal, when it says if something else is writing through me. Yes, yes, yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So story poetry, and I'll keep my eye on the chat to see if anything else pops in. Story poetry for us, we can probably find this in our work. We might use poetry to express an emotion or to capture a moment or to transmit wisdom or a message or love or an articulation of something that feels perhaps transcendent or like it's flowing through us. With our story poetry, we're going to want to bring in the power of story as a container for the craft. And so I've noticed with my work, so I have my book right here. I flipped through it earlier today, and a lot of the poems are not story poems. A lot of the poems are they're not true story poems. I'm going to talk about what I mean by that. There might be a characterization of something I want, or a mystical feeling, insight that I want to transmit. Or I might be writing about something that didn't really happen, but it feels like it's articulating something that I want to happen or something that I need to say. I did a poetry class in the fall called Blood Work, where I go into poetry as catharsis. And that's included in this. We're just going to add a little bit of context with the story. So poetry for catharsis would be that raw expression of the emotion. The emotion needs to move. It needs to complete its movement. The scream that never got to happen finally gets to happen on the page. The love that we didn't get to make finally gets to be felt and experienced. The heartbreak that didn't have a voice finally has a voice. And so there's this unburdening of the emotional body that gets to happen through the poem. But there may not necessarily be a story involved in that. There might not be a moment or an experience that we are transmitting when we're expressing in a cathartic way. And so for our intents and purposes, we're going to be noticing stories about experiences that we have had. So that's what we're going to be working with today. And I'm going to dive deeply into all of these different prompts with you guys. But I want to just talk a little bit about the context of a story. So story has an interesting, if we have poetry, and here there's poetry, not necessarily a poem, but poetry. And then we have story, which has a lot of range to it. But in a sense, our life is completely, it's held in the container of story. We know ourselves in present time because of the experiences that we've moved through in the past. We understand who we are, where we're going. We feel a future that's informed by an arc that we are co-creating in many ways. But story essentially has an arc. It has a journey that's happening. There might be a beginning and a middle and an end, and it might be a very tiny, very short story. It might be a moment. I have a poem in here that's about me eating an orange, and there's an evolution that happens, a subtle one, a perspective shift, a drop of wisdom, an insight, a breakthrough. There's a subject, perhaps. Usually that's a part of a story. There's a subject interacting with experience, and maybe we're going into that subject's perspective. And so when I talk about true stories, I have a lot of poems that are written, here that are, the subject is it's a character in me. Like my sailor poem is this, she's not real. She's real in me, and it's a true feeling that I have. But it's not an experience that I lived where I was really riding the open seas and refusing to go home to my lover. And, I'm using metaphor to describe a feeling, and there was a catharsis in that. But there's a very important alchemy that happens for us as human beings when we actually honor the stories that we've lived as worthy of being immortalized in the beautiful expression of poetry. Because there's so many parts of us and so many moments that get dishonored, get dismissed, don't get to come with us. And there's a lot of parts of us that are hiding in shame in some of those stories. So one of the first objectives that we have tonight, if we want to use this time this way or this practice this way, is to feel which parts of our story have not been honored and are maybe hiding behind the walls or the confines of shame. And what could we do to free those parts of ourselves by bringing them into the present moment and saying, you deserve to have your story told. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be seen. And I will love you by telling your story. I just finished plowing through reading Dopamine Nation, which is not poetic really at all. I will say that, but really juicy and informative for awakening to this sort of global crisis that we have of overconsumption and distraction and dissociation from our bodies. And one of the practices in that book for conquering dopamine addiction is radical honesty. And this has felt like a theme for me that I keep coming back to. Like the whole why that I write is because I will say I have realized with a lot of pain that I have been a liar. And I don't mean that as it to be cruel to myself. I say it with a sort of stern, loving reflection to myself, a wake-up call of this is how much fear has gotten its hooks in you, Caitlin, that you have denied the truth of who you are so many times and not honored her and not given her a voice. And so much of my practice with poetry is about coming back to and actually hunting for that truth, hunting to find like how much more of my true voice, how much more of my true self did I leave behind that I can find and bring home to me now with love, with beauty, with honor. And so in this framework, we can work with the story of an experience, which was an arc of this thing occurred. This, for me as the subject, I experienced this and I'm going to honor it. We can also work with the story of a belief, right? Going into the story of a belief. The belief usually has a story about how the world works, what other people are like, how love always goes, who we are, right? What God is not. And so a belief is a story. And our interpretations of meaning are also stories. So we might have an experience that gives us a story that we start to live with. And it becomes so familiar and so deeply rooted and so second nature that we don't even realize that we are creating the story that we're living in because of an interpretation that we had at some point. And so one of the reasons that telling the truth and telling our true stories or practicing radical honesty as is described in Dopamine Nation is so powerful is because we become the narrator of the story that we lived, the story that we believed, the story that we interpreted, and we bring our awareness to face maybe something we've never faced before because we've identified as it. Either that or we've completely exiled it. We bring ourselves to face it, we bear witness to it, we become the narrator of that story, and instantaneously, as soon as we start to do that, we create a little bit of distance between our identity and that story. We get back a little bit of power that story has over us. We're able to look at it from the outside and actually ask ourselves, is this story, when we're talking about interpretation or belief, is it true? I truly experienced it. I truly felt this way, but is it actually mine? Does it feel authentic to me? Does it feel like a story I want to live? And once we create that little bit of distance, we start to have a little bit more opportunity for agency, which is creativity. It's an opportunity to write the next chapter, or to understand or to see the next chapter. And also, once we get a little bit of distance from the experiences that we've had, that little bit of distance gives us a little bit more power, a little bit more agency, where they don't occupy us. They don't live inside of our subconscious and live inside of our bodies in a way where they're hijacking us and they're trying to complete their movement, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But before I get to expression and completing the movement, I want to talk about the concept of truth. So Adrienne Rich described it really beautifully in this, it being very intricate and very mysterious, and being almost like a lifelong journey, a lifelong question that we get to ask of what is the truth. And something I offer in my, a perspective I offer when I work with emotions, as a coach, which I'm not currently doing, but I've done for a long time, is just honoring that a feeling that is present is always true. So sometimes we get a little caught up when we have an experience or feeling or belief, which is like, well, there's this other perspective and there's this other perspective, and maybe I shouldn't say that, and maybe I shouldn't express that because it's not necessarily true. And we start to kind of like silence this part of us that has this feeling. And because there's other truths, and there's my partner's truth, and there's the greater truth. And so what I want us to really nestle into tonight and start to honor is just that when an experience arises, when a feeling comes to the surface, when a belief is activated or an interpretation is really strong, it's true because it's the experience that we're having. It's not the truth. So everything we're going to be talking about with true story poetry has to do with honoring that we have a true story. We truly felt that way. We truly believed that. We truly had that interpretation. And as soon as we give ourselves permission to accept that that was the experience or is the current experience, and that it just is true right now, but that truth is also dynamic and always subjective, because everyone is filtering truth through their own subjective story, then there's a little bit more softness to that. The stakes aren't so high. We can let the true story be present and be seen and be written and be told without it having to define us, because we're a creature that is constantly shape-shifting and flowing through different energies that produce different living truths in different moments, and we're evolving. And so writing a true story in the framework of poetry allows us to have a more productive and conscious and conscientious evolutionary process. It creates enough self reflection to be able to update our stories as we move along, while honoring them and while allowing them to exist, allowing them to be. We get to come back into this sense of all of me is welcome here. So with our sense of true story, I just want to bring in that it is a paradox, and that we can give ourselves permission tonight to say, this is a true story. Sometimes, I have some stories I lived that honestly, as a teacher and as a coach, I'm afraid to tell them still, because it feels like, if I tell that story, that will define me. And then what will people think of me? It will redefine me in people's eyes. They won't respect me because I don't respect myself there, And it's like, there's a part of me that hasn't been able to love that story. There's a part of me that hasn't been able to forgive that and accept that that was a part of my story. And there's a part of me that's afraid that I'll believe that that's still my story if I honor it, right? It's like, it's a really beautiful and powerful and sometimes painful mirror. But if we can hold the paradox that these stories are true because they have been true for us and they're true feelings for us, but that they're also not the truth, then we can make space to let them be told. and to let them give us the gift, to let them finish with us, as David Foster Wallace was referencing. How will they be finished with us? Usually they want to be loved. And usually, here's the fun part, they usually have a pearl. They usually have some kind of wisdom piece that is so vital and so important and so dear to our soul that our soul won't let us graduate until we get that treasure. It's like you have to write the story, you have to tell the story, you have to bear witness to it to understand why this happened and what the beauty is of it, and to get that jewel that was designed for you. And so we keep coming back on the spiral because we haven't, not because we're being punished, not because we're moving too slow, but because there's actually more treasure here. And our soul insists that we claim it. So, yeah, feeling this relationship with truth, which is really the heartbeat of tonight's call. What does it look like to get excited about awakening more to the truth that we haven't yet discovered in ourselves, or we haven't yet honored? I'm feeling, let me look back at this. Okay.
Oh,
Oh, thank you,
wow.
Robert. Thank you. Uh, okay, so yes, okay, I'm back on track. I wasn't really looking at my notes, but I want to share a couple more things. So when it comes to expression, Kilo mentioned this, and this is really important way that we can use it. Expressing an emotion is one of the ways that he described what poetry is to him. And so I want to just go into that a little bit for context. And the way I talk about this with emotional work in my other coaching worlds is there is an aspect to the story of an emotion where emotion it's basically flowing through the body as an electromagnetic charge, almost like water. Like it goes into motion, it's triggered, it's like a wave, right? There's a lot of wateriness to, and sometimes in the case of rage or anger, we might feel it more as fire, but it has this liquid movement, and even fire wants to move. It doesn't just, like a flame doesn't just light and sit there unless we have it, captured by a wick. It wants to move. It's trying to complete a journey. It's trying to burn out, or in the water's case, it's trying to flow through and cleanse something. And when we have a story that we won't look at because it brings up an emotion in us that doesn't feel comfortable, that emotion then gets frozen in the story of whenever it was generated, and it stays in the unconscious, coming through in our dreams, like Adrienne Rich was referencing, or the subconscious in the body, and it will hang out there until it gets to complete its motion. They don't just go away. They often get buried, and we get armor. We get really good, coping strategies to manage them or to suppress them. And so a lot of our stories, we don't tell them because they make us uncomfortable, or we don't look at them again or revisit them because they elicit feelings like grief or anger, or the desire, the impulse to defend ourselves, or the passion of a love that no longer is alive in the same way. It might actually be bringing us back to love, and maybe that love feels too intense to hold. But those stories are containing the energy of the emotion and this isn't true for every story we've lived. We've also expressed a lot of our emotions and had many complete movements. But one way to use this practice of telling true stories with poetry is to welcome the wave of this emotion, knowing that through the story writing, it gets to complete its movement. And something Satya shared when she was talking about her writing was, we get to learn from the writing in process. There were things, that she described writing through and then learning from the process, realizing things in real time. And there's something about expression, which writing is, and which emotions want to do. They just want to express. They are not really too concerned with what happens because they're expressed. They just have this natural primal impulse to flow, to be fully expressed, and to complete their movement of expression. What happens when we allow them to do that, whether that's somatically in our bodies or on a piece of paper as a poem or expressive journal writing entry, is we will often get the treasure that's in the experience by allowing it to complete its movement. But it has to complete its movement first. Otherwise, it will also keep generating patterns that give it an opportunity to complete its movement. So one of the ways that we're going to explore and consider working with this tonight is going to be feeling, is there a story that I haven't honored or haven't let myself look at, haven't revisited, haven't fully processed, that I can go into it with the warrior poet's heart and say, I'm going to let this work me. I'm going to tell the story and I'm going to let myself feel the feeling. I'm going to let the feeling complete its movement. And I just might also find some essential treasure for my soul that just radically shifts the energy and the experience of my life. And we don't do it for that reason, but we might get that gift out of it. Another way that I want to now introduce, which I love doing, and it's way less painful and way less scary, but also so important for life and for humanity. Tonight's call for me, it feels like this is poetry writing for the human experience right now more than ever. Is, there's a term in journalism called gonzo journaling. And gonzo journaling is a way of putting yourself out in the experience that you want to write about or document or record and share. And it's not objective, it's subjective. You go in as a character of the scene and you take those field notes about what it's like to be in deep in that experience. If you have, you want to do some reporting about, like a drug cartel, or in, Hunter S. Thompson's case, like a biker gang, you go register and you go get involved and yes, me too. He's such a legend. Wild legend. Ooh, he belongs in the muse room for sure. But sometimes we can relate to life in this way that makes us so much more present and interested in what's happening here and now. And it doesn't need to be a biker gang. It doesn't need to be the drug cartel. It doesn't need to be like one of my favorite writers, Joan Didion. She immersed herself in the Haight-Ashbury scene in the 60s to, write a story when she wrote Slouching Towards Bethlehem about what it was like to be in that hippie scene that was happening at that time. And so that was a form of gonzo journalism. We can do something really brave and wild for ourselves as artists and be like, I want to go have this experience and I want to record it. And some gorgeous poetry comes through. Like Hunter S. Thompson's case, his work was very poetic. So is Joan Didion's. But we can also apply that frame to very mundane, ordinary experiences. Like, I'm going to be a gonzo journalist to going to the coffee shop today. And I'm going to record the scent of the air and the way that the cashier spoke to me and the temperature of the room and what was happening in my body as I received my cup of coffee and how it felt to step outside the door and look up and feel the sunlight break on my skin. And you never know what kind of rich insight and the quality of presence that comes when we take the assignment to document the experience that we're having. So every moment is an unfolding of story. Every moment, doesn't have to be emotionally charged. We can use it in that way as a way of truly healing trauma, truly resolving and bringing home parts of ourselves from these corridors of shame that we've created over the years. We can also honor life by being these sort of gonzo journalists to the human experience and honoring that, some of the examples I was dreaming into earlier is like these little moments that we sometimes forget, where, a man asks for money on the street corner and you have a really sweet interaction. Or, for me, one of mine recently was the rose bush seemed dead and then one day it came back to life. And there's a story there. And when I take poetry as a craft and I let it record and immortalize these moments of experience, these stories of experience, there's something that enriches my memory. It certainly enriches the quality of presence I'm having. And it feels like an actual revolutionary act at this point because we are so pulled away from presence. And even in our spiritual work, I will say, like, there's so much focus now on like healing and fixing and unpacking and doing all of this work with the past, which is really important. But in it, even in that noble and brave undertaking of doing this deep inner spiritual work, we can be really distant from the present moment. We can really miss the rich vital gifts of what it means to be here right now, savoring and experiencing the story that we're living. And it is a way to battle against the doldrums of familiarity that I referenced when Robert shared at the beginning, where it's like, okay, do I not feel like as alive in my appreciation for Eric as when we were separated? Well, I could go step outside right now and I could write a poem about what it's like to sit with him in the living room while he watches basketball. And it would actually bring to life that love. It's a tool. So this is going to be our other option here tonight. You might want to work with all of these in different ways. Is we have the option for the catharsis, the alchemical transformation of a painful, challenging, or shameful feeling story that we've lived in the past to be honored and brought to new life and give us the treasure that it's holding. And we also have the opportunity to awaken the here and now appreciation for some of the life that we might otherwise miss through the craft of writing a story about it. And it's especially powerful when we do it with something that we feel a little bit resistant to. It's like, I'm having a bad day. Going back full circle to the beginning of the call, I'm having a bad day. Well, maybe I should write about how it feels to have a bad day. Maybe I should go deeper into that experience. And this willingness to be present and to be honest and to be radically honest, if we will, it's helping us practice vulnerability and intimacy. And so something that I think is really important to be aware of, and again, going back to, Satya's share about noticing when the audience is in the room, that can be a big obstacle to the art. Sometimes it can also be helpful. Like when I write spoken word where I'm doing a musical rhythm and I want it to be, I imagine performing it, like I want to feel the audience a little bit. That's what I'm writing it for. I am writing it for an audience. I have a message. But when it comes to confronting this core wound many of us have with loneliness and wanting to be seen and wanting deeply to be known and understood, there's an implicit, intimate other every time we write a poem. Every time we write a poem, it's like, we might not feel that, it might not be conscious at all, but we're creating an intimate dialogue that allows us to describe what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, tell our story in a beautiful way or in a candid way or in an honest way on such a level that it takes the imaginary reader, as Stephen King used to say, I think, or not used to say, but I think it was Stephen King called it the ideal reader. I could be transposing that, but the ideal reader is, it's not the audience, but it's sort of the felt sense that we want to share ourselves with somebody else. And so we write. And maybe we also want to create a legacy Maybe we also want, and a part of us wants to last longer than our body will. And we want to record the way that we see the world. And this makes our true, honest stories so important, and really a way of transcending death. So I often, there's another quote. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting who the author was, but the essence of it, I'm forgetting the entire quote, but the essence of it was, she wrote about how the idea of dying without speaking one's truth gave her vertigo. It was like an assassination of the truth, as though death would render it definitive. I think there's a part of us that feels, as much as we're scared to be that vulnerable, to cut ourselves open that much, and to dare to imagine that it's worth writing or sharing, even with ourselves, that also simultaneously understands that if I don't express this now while I'm here, it dies with me. My story dies with me. My deepest truth dies with me. So feeling that tonight, what is the why, for why I want to build this relationship with my truth? How can I let that be the fire that I carry into this time? And this is a beginning. This is actually the heart of everything we're doing here in the Playhouse. It's about finding ever deeper, ever more joyful, ever more life force generating ways to express everything that's inside of us and have fun doing it. So finally, I'm going to offer I'm just going to put this in the chat, I think, because I'm going to put this also in the classroom when I upload this. Sorry. I'm going to just drop in a little list of inspirational prompts of why or ways that we can practice using this. And it's kind of a recap of what I just shared. So here are the ways. This is kind of a lot. Actually, I feel like maybe that's too much. I'm just going to read them to you because I feel like that's going to distract you guys. So we'll just go over them again. So ways to practice, because we're about to get into our writing practice. So again, recording or documenting. So our gonzo journalism. We want to capture beauty, capture meaning, capture the quality of the living moment. Honoring and cherishing. So again, that example would be like, I'm going to go out there right now and I'm going to write a poem about Eric or something. I'm going to actually honor and cherish and anchor the felt experience of what's beautiful about being alive as me right now. Weaving the history of your life. So a beautiful byproduct of being a poet is that we have these landmarks in our poetry where we are able to anchor memory in this very vivid way. And so if there's pieces that we still remember right now from our past, in 10 years we might not remember them so well. If there's a story from a previous relationship or living in a different city, something that's alive in you that wants to be anchored as part of your life story, part of your memoir, even if you're never going to share it, but you want to honor it, that might be a way to practice tonight. Grieving. And also, I would say grieving as a form of bringing what's died back to life. So I don't know about you guys, but when it comes to certain levels of grief, my automatic disorientation is because it's painful, because I don't understand it, because it feels like too much, I want to turn away. And there's something about turning back towards it and bringing that which is no longer alive back to life through the poem as a living memory, as an honorable story of what I experienced, whether that was challenging or beautiful. And there's grief work that's done in that process. And again, liberation of suppressed energy or emotions, and healing trauma. So this is really getting into one of the big things that trauma is trying to do is it's trying to complete the movement. It wants to have the catharsis. It wants to actually fight back or run. That's pretty deep. I don't necessarily recommend that you guys dive into that right now. But just knowing that this is an avenue to really go into a story that's alive or suppressed in your body and to bring it to completion. We can work tonight in essay style or journaling style. I'm going to give you precise prompts right now. And we can also work in the beautiful qualities of poetry, the metaphor, the symbol, focusing on the feeling, focusing on the perspective, feeling the different qualities of story. You know, what's the subject? What's the arc? What's the pearl of the story? What's the message? What's the wisdom piece? Is there one? Maybe there's not. Maybe it's just like a little capture of a moment in time, but there's a beginning and an end. And so it is. And so it's perfect. And while we're working with this, just noticing, or maybe in hindsight, as a perspective, noticing what's happening in you. Is there more self-awareness that's coming through? Is there a pattern that you're able to see? Is there an epiphany that happens? Where are you getting a little bit more free as you allow yourself to practice this? And how is it supporting your evolution? Yeah, I think that that's good for this. So let's do some writing for about, I'm going to drop these prompts in here. I'll start with the first two. So using the ways that we are exploring practicing tonight, follow the truth of your current interests. There's probably something sparking in you. It doesn't have to look any type of way. It could be a feeling that came up at the beginning when I asked, did something arise for you? It could be something that happened today, or a story that happened in your past, or a gonzo journalist style way of capturing an experience you recently had. It could be a belief or an interpretation. Just notice what's starting to naturally arise as interesting to you. Any form is perfect. And then go ahead and commit to that for now, knowing that you can play with this in many different forms. And then see if you can connect to an intention with it. Are you honoring it? Are you telling this, like a journalist telling the story? Are you letting something go? Are you helping an emotion complete its movement? Are you trying to keep the history of your life? Are you creating alchemy? Feel what that might be. And we'll start there. Just getting the intention down. And then I'm going to give you a couple more prompts once you have your intention clarified, and we will be off. Okay, I was waiting to see if Kilo came back, but I wanna give you guys plenty of time to write. So I'm gonna go ahead and share this, and it'll be in the chat for him too. So our second piece is hold your intention, hold it lightly. And you're just gonna start by free writing a version of this story that captures the essence of the story, or you can list out the elements of the story. And I'm going to drop some prompts here. Is there an arc to it? A beginning, a middle, and an end? Or what's the journey that happens? What are the materials, images, sensual elements of the moment? Feel the environment and the sensations. Just take notes. You don't have to use everything, but this is just gonna kind of collect material for inspiration. And then you're a poet, so you can choose what you feel like is worth keeping. And then notice what feelings arise in you in the story, in the characters of the story, and also in present time. There might be information there. And then anything else that comes up for you. So start by getting the story down or getting the elements down. I love that you have a writing board, Kilo. That's so cool. I want one. And then see if it wants to become a poem. You might write something really poetic. You might write a form of poetry that's more like a journal entry or storytelling or essay. And you also might end up with a more classic poem that's structured in the way that you like to write poetry. So we'll take 15 minutes, and then I'm going to check in with you guys and see how you're feeling about coming back to circle, or if you want more time. Okay. Enjoy. And I'll keep an eye on the chat in case any questions come in. Time flies when you're telling the truth. I want to just tune in with you guys. As always, if you're in a flow and you want to stay in a flow, the flow is the goddess here. So stay with her. Let's just take a moment and use this practice to notice how we feel about it. How are we feeling? I feel like, relieved. It's relieving for me personally. But it may not feel the same for you. And it's also one story out of many, many, many stories. So let's just take a moment and notice our narrator, how our narrator feels about this subject that we've chosen. And let's also reflect into, does the intention that we thought we had feel like it's unfolding, or is it a little bit different, the result or the outcome or the form, the why?